We'll do 18 today, and then good Lord willing, we'll do chapter 19, and then we'll do chapter 20. And that'll pretty much end us because our time is running shy. There's less time than there is chapters to do. So I would like to encourage you, maybe a homework assignment, if you will, to read chapters 21 through 31. And if something stands out to you, text me your thought on it. I think that would be good for all of us. I've read through Proverbs. It's hard to put down Proverbs because you think about it and you want to read it and you continue to do it. But if you would like to, just read the latter part of Proverbs and text me thoughts about chapters or verbs or the action that we can apply to our lives. I think that'll help us throughout the study. I wish we could get there. I'm teaching the high school class next quarter, so we wouldn't be able to do Proverbs then, and then we've got some curriculum things going on too. So I guess we'll just be done in Proverbs until maybe another time. But if you'll read ahead and you'll study and you'll text me some of those thoughts, we can learn together that way. So Proverbs chapter 18 is another interesting chapter full of the parallelisms. You know, Solomon says it a couple of different ways, just using different words. And then the last verse of Proverbs 18, verse 24, is where I'd like to spend most of the time today. It talks about being friendly. And it talks about how to become a friend, really. There's a lot there. But let's read this chapter. Then we'll talk about a couple of verses. And then if it's okay, we'll just jump on down to the last verse and we'll talk about friends and the application and that kind of thing. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. When the wicked comes, contempt comes also, and with dishonor comes reproach. The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. It is not good to show partiality to the wicked or to overthrow the righteous in judgment. A fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. He who is slothful in his works is a brother to him who is a great destroyer. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own esteem. Before destruction, the heart of a man is haughty, and before honor is humility. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness, but who can bear a broken spirit? The heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. A man's gifts makes room for him and brings him before great men. The first one to plead his cause seems right, until his neighbor comes and examines him. Casting lots causes contentions to cease and keeps the mighty apart. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city. Contentions are like the bars of a castle. A man's stomach shall be satisfied with the fruit of his mouth. From the produce of his lips he shall be filled. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. The poor man uses entreaties, but the rich answers roughly. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Solomon did a good job in chapter 18, I think. It is very practical. And as we read that, it is so practical that we can put it into practice today in 2023. The words that he chose to put together stings a little bit if you have a true and honest heart, right? So verse 1 talks about a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. That's interesting that Solomon is warning against self-counsel, right? He's warning against, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm not going to ask anybody. And that's the way it's going to be. But what happens? He rages against all wise judgment. Bad. Clyde said bad. It is very bad. So those are strong words and really penetrating words when you think about it. How easy is it for us to lean on our own wisdom, our own experiences, our own thoughts? It's easy. That's what we do, right? That's what we want to do. Well, that Brian sure is independent. You know, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Clyde said bad, Betty said depends. So it does depend, right? It depends on what? It depends on my wisdom, David said. It depends on what the thought processes that I have, right? It depends on, am I getting knowledge from God's word or if I'm getting knowledge from me, right? So as he starts this chapter, it actually is in the context of chapter 17, verse 28. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. You know, we talked about that 2 weeks ago. When he shuts his lips, he is considered what? Perceptive. He may be a fool, but he's not opened his mouth to remove any doubt. And now he says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. Again, it's pretty much the same concept, just different words. And then look at verse 7. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. What's a snare? Trap, hindrance. You know, people that trap animals for fur or food or whatever, they manufacture snares, right? They do it intentionally. So a fool's lips are the snare of his soul. A fool's mouth is his destruction. Now Solomon's already said, just because we have the ability to speak doesn't mean we have to. Chapter 17, verse 28. Verse 1, he's saying that he isolates himself, and now verse 7, he says it's what? Destruction. You're going to be destroyed if you think like that. Yes, sir, Mickey. Mickey said that this passage in this context reminds him of being stubborn. that mindset of being stubborn. And he referenced John Adams, the second president, and said he was a church-going man, and he prayed to allow me to be stubborn when I'm right. And if we stop and think about that just for a minute, that's good advice, right? Because if we have the knowledge of what God is saying to us, we know we're right, we know the truth, we shouldn't at all back down, right? How do we know that? Or can we know that? Absolutely we can, right? How do we know it? We got to put it in. We got to read it. We got to apply it. So this context is talking about a verbal destruction. I kind of relate it to, do you know someone that the more they talk, the more you quit listening? It's just vain words, you know. It just doesn't mean anything. Do we know people like that? Yeah, we all do, right? Sometimes I feel I'm that way. The words just keep coming. Is it fair to say in this context, even verse 28 of 17, and now verse 1 of chapter 18 and verse 7 of 18, is it fair to say that we can apply this statement? Study to be quiet. Study to be quiet. Now, I'm not suggesting that we be quiet when we try to convert our community or our friends, or we don't need to be quiet when it comes to showing the truth to someone, right?
Depends on the occasion.
It does depend on the occasion. It does depend on it. Any other comments on this context? Let's look at verse 9. Well, actually, let's talk about verse 8 because it's a little interesting, the words that he used. The words of a talebearer are like a tasty trifle. What does that mean? I think the answer is in the next part. And they go down into the inmost body. It's a Hebrew tradition that it's like a wound. You know, where is a wound that happens on the body? It goes just deeper than the surface, right? So these words of a talebearer penetrate and hurt like a wound. And it goes as far as to say, even it could be the truth, right? But it's a secret that doesn't need to be told. Or it's a situation that nobody else needs to know about it. And the talebearer can't wait for everybody to know. It is not a made-up lie. Could be. But for the most part, this wound that it's talking about, the inmost body, is truth that would hurt getting out. You think Solomon experienced that personally throughout his life? Yes, ma'am. She said that she said he had a lot of wives. So I agree. I think he did experience it personally. Now, verse 9. He who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great what? Destroyer. So if you are lazy, is that a brother to a destroyer? What does that mean? Usually a family nucleus, I've got two brothers. Biological brothers. I have a lot of spiritual brothers. Basically, that means you don't go back to back with them. I've got your back, Clyde. He's got mine, right? So when someone says that you're lazy or slothful to your work, you're going back to the destroyer. You may not actually have the physical sword or the weapon or whatever, but you're aiding in that process, right? So the next question is why? Why did Solomon say that if you're slothful, you're like a destroyer? God said in one way, he's teaching the end result of being wasteful. Jim said you cannot be counted on. That's right. He said that your work is not getting done. Jim is applying that if we're all working together and you're not pulling your part, somebody's got to come back and do that part that was undone. That's the context. So how do we apply that to our spiritual life today? I'm sorry? Jim said you pull your own weight. That's right. You pull your own weight. How do we pull our own weight? I'm sorry? Yes, ma'am. Standing up for what is right. Standing up for what's right. I agree. So how do we pull our own weight in Proverbs? We're studying Proverbs, we've had for a couple of quarters now, and it's been a good study. But how do you pull your own weight? Because I can read it to you, I can study it, but at some point you have got to go, what does it say? What does it say? Not what does it mean, but I'm going to read this. And that applies to the whole of the Bible, does it not? So I think that's what he's teaching us in this manner. Any other comments? Look at verse 13. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. Okay. How do you answer a matter before you hear it? So I heard something. Foolishly. That's exactly right. It is foolishly answered because you don't know the whole situation, right, George? Yes, ma'am. Carol said that a modern day example just recently, a young boy, 7 years old, goes to a football game, the Chiefs game, paints his face black and red, wears an Indian headdress, and he gets blasted for being racist. But before that, the person that blasted him didn't know that he was a Native American, that his grandfather sits on the council for the Native American Indians, and he has went to every ball game that way. He just paints his face. That's an application of what Solomon is talking about. That's true.
Is he addressing the problem of prejudice?
Is Solomon addressing the problem of prejudice?
I think he's addressing the problem of prejudice.
I think so too.
Preset, pre-designed thought about whatever it is.
Dennis said that he's addressing prejudice. You've got a predetermined mindset. You've already made up your mind no matter what's going to be said. I'm going to quote Larry. I've quoted him a couple times. He says that a bad decision is based more on lack of information than poor judgment. And there's a lot to be said there. Because we make a rash decision, but it doesn't have we don't have all the information. Yes, sir, Brian. Brian said, a modern way to say it is, don't jump to conclusions. Yes, ma'am. Sister DeMonte said that just because we have an opinion doesn't mean that it has to come out. Especially that if it's hurtful or even on social media we blast people, we need to do a little bit of research before it comes out. It's the same concept as we need to listen twice as much, right? We've got to get it in, but it doesn't necessarily have to come out. Just because I have an opinion that the Blue Blazer is the best for me today on December the 3rd, you may disagree, you know? I'm not asking you to compliment my jacket. I do care, but I don't really care. But we could say that, you know. Why did he wear the blue jacket today? Because it went with the shirt. Why did he wear the shirt? Because it was ironed, you know. She said it may not even be any of your business. Yes. Yeah. For those of you online, she said, if you can't be helpful, just shut up. And just because you have that opinion, it may not even be your business. That's exactly what Solomon is teaching us, right? It is folly and shame to him. Could the application also be that we're trying to respond before we get all the information? I told you about the sales class and what I learned. We need to listen to understand, not listen to respond. And I'm terrible at it. But we get pieces of the information, and then all of a sudden it becomes folly and shame on us, right? Just like the little boy that had the headdress on, it was probably an authentic headdress. If his grandfather sits on the council, it probably was more real than what any of the sports clubs could, or what am I trying to say? Gift shops at the arena could sell, you know. Have you ever got in a situation that you only got part of the information and you made a decision based on it, and it went from bad to worse in a hurry? So how do we obtain the correct information? Listen. Study. We have to be able to say, that's not right. Let me tell you a personal situation. Ever since Heather and I have been married, I will say something to her, and she will say, in the most loving way she can, who's your source? Or who did you hear that from? Why do you believe that? Well, it made me mad at first. I'm like, well, that's the way it is. But really what I was doing was getting to the conclusion before I had all the information. She was just simply saying, you need to think about the information, you know. So I thank her for that. But that's the application of what we're trying to learn in this verse. Any other comments on this one? So let's get to verse 18. Because, verse 24. And it talks about a few words, but it talks about a great deal of an attitude. To be a friend, you must be friendly. That's how it starts, right? What is a friend? How do you become a friend? What's the definition of a friend? You ever looked it up? Someone who knows you in and out. I've got several definitions of a friend, but one of them is when a friend calls another friend and says, hey, my water broke, can you take me to the hospital? What happens? The friend goes, right? That's exactly what happens. Hey, I'm broke down on the side of the road. Can you come? Yeah, I can be there. Hey, I got a Bible question. I'm confused about baptism. Do we go with the same urgencies we went with the flat tire? Yes, sir. Lewis said that he gives a perfect, real example because his lawnmower broke down. I'm implying, as you were trying to mow your yard, because it needed to be done, Wrote on the internet, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do. Brandon Savage said, I'll be there. What did it take him? 15 minutes to get to your house? About 10 minutes, and he was mowing his yard. That's trivial for everybody in this room except that man right there. It's not trivial. It was a need that you had, and he took care of it. So what is a friend? A man who has friends must himself be friendly. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We choose our friends. We don't choose our family. Right? And we all try to love our families. We all try to do the very best we can, I think. But she said, we're pretty much stuck with them. We don't necessarily choose to be with them, right? So how do you show yourself to be friendly? That's where it begins. How do I show myself to be friendly? Hey, Jason. That's part of it, right? Hey, Jason. He's waving back at me. That's being friendly, right? So how do we become at the level of friends that it's talking about here? Carol said that the ESV, the English Standard Version, reads that verse as many companions you'll have, and then the sticks closer than a brother. We all have companions, but friends is love. And it makes a bond that is so interwoven that we know them better than anyone else, you know. So it's a bond that's not very easily broken. Yes, sir, Clyde. Yeah, that's right. Clyde said that if we train our character based on God's word, that our conscience will allow us to make the right decisions. And that's right. We do train it, right? Yes, sir, Mr. Law. It's right opposite, isn't it? He said, Brother Law said that it comes to his mind that we have this saying, blood is thicker than water, but in this case, water is thicker than blood. So, if you will, go back into 17 again, chapter 17, verse 17. This will help us in a situation. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. And it's the context and the concept that Carol was speaking of to go to ruin. You know, if you have the wrong companions, they're not really friends. They don't really love you. You don't really love them. You just kind of know them. That could get you to ruin. Look at verse 17 of chapter 17. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for what? Adversity. So a friend's going to love you all the time. Remember, we talked about that word all. What does it do for us? What does that word mean? It leaves nothing out, right? So a friend loves all times. How do you become a friend? I think 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 teaches us how to become a friend. What is that context talking about? Do you remember what it's teaching us? 1 Corinthians 13. Love. She said it. Love. It goes back to you have to be loving in order to be friendly, right? So if you're a friend and you're going to stick closer than a brother, there's three things that I think that friends do. Friends protect, friends are dedicated, and friends are honest. Friends protect, dedicated, and are honest. That's showing some good character, isn't it? How do you become dedicated? We hear it sometimes, actually a lot, in the sports realm. Larry Bird made, not shot, made 1,000 3-pointers a day. 1,000. That's pretty dedicated, right? That's pretty dedicated. How do we relate that to being a friend? Hey, I'm broke down on the side of the road. Absolutely, I'll be there. Hey, can I get some food? I'm out of food. What are you going to do? Take them to the grocery store, she said. We're going to do whatever it takes, right? So we protect, we're dedicated, and we're honest. Let's look at a couple of passages. Turn over to Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11, verses 5 through 8. And when Jesus is speaking here, he is talking about a friend. What if a friend comes at midnight? And he said to them, which of you shall have a friend and go to him at midnight and say to him, friend, lend me 3 loaves? For a friend of mine has come to me on his journey, and I have nothing to set before him. And he will answer from within and say, do not trouble me, the door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot rise and give to you. I say to you, though he will not rise and give to him because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will rise and give him as many as he needs. What is he teaching us? I'm giving you what you want just to shut you up and for you to go away. Possibly. Because the first thought in a situation is probably not, yeah, I really want to go to the side of the interstate and change this tire, or help change this tire, or help put a bumper on, or whatever you do. The first thought's probably, oh, I have to do that. I think that is the concept that we've got to change our attitude. We may think it, nobody ever knows it, but we go and we help and we do and we love, right? That's what Solomon is teaching, is he not? That the first thought is, our attitude is, yes. Instead of this guy coming at midnight and saying, I need 3 loaves, he goes, everything's shut up, my kids are asleep, we're not ruining it, we're not turning over this apple cart, right? But then he gets up and goes. Yes, Miss Barbara. Exactly. You're not supposed to do it because you feel like you have to. What kind of job do you get if you want to do something versus I have to? Go clean up your room. Why? Because I said so. I have to do that. Rake everything in the closet or under the bed, right? Y'all didn't ever do that growing up? Instead of, hey, I want to keep my room clean. That way I can play basketball more. So look at another passage, if you will. We talked about 1 Corinthians 13, and we talked about the concept here in Luke. But how do we become a friend? Go to John chapter 15, verse 13. John 15, verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his what? Friends. What kind of love do you have for your friend to lay down your life? And here is a question. Why did God allow John to say friends and not family? Is it not the same context, the same concept as Solomon said, a friend's going to love you and be closer than a brother? It's the attitude, right? It's because I want to be your friend. So you think about 1 Corinthians 13, you think about Luke 11, you think about John 13, and you think about Ephesians, there's a couple of passages in Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 2, beginning in 11 through 18, it's talking about being reconciled to Christ. That's how you show yourself to be friendly, is reconciled to Christ. And then James 4, 7 through 10 teaches us to be a friend by putting God first. So Solomon's saying, this friend's going to stick to you closer than a brother. Why? Because he's got the knowledge, he's applied it, he has the wisdom, and he's putting God first. If you put God first, you're going to be a good friend. Clyde said it's the first commandment. 21 times or thereabouts in the book of Proverbs, Solomon references the fear of God. The fear of the Lord is the instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. The fear of the Lord. He's just reiterating in verse 24, to be friendly, you better fear God. Keep His commandments. And then he says it again in Ecclesiastes. The whole of man is what? Fear God, keep His commandments. So if you think about chapter 18, here's my summary. Chapter 18 is teaching us to love to the point of that our friends, that we would die for them. We've not been asked physically to die for our friends that don't look like, because we're still here today, right? But do we have the attitude and the mindset to be friendly? I think that's the hinge of chapter 18. Thank you very much for your attention and your comments. And good Lord will, we'll do 19 next week.